Good morning. Welcome to the Bell and Pollock Legal Show. Our law firm is Bell and Pollock. We are injury attorneys, and we bring the show to you to teach you each week about a different injury subject. If you want to listen to this show or any of our shows, you can go to our website, championsofthepeople.com. It's championsofthepeople.com. It's at the bottom of the homepage, and you can click on the podcast. You can play it. You can download it. It's all free for you. You can also email us questions or call us with questions at any time. Our telephone number is 303-795-5900. That's 795-5900. And so we cover a different subject each week. We try to give you a level playing field with these insurance companies that defend these claims against the lawyers who represent these insurance companies who defend these claims, and try to reduce your damages, beat your claim, give you nothing, give you down to zero or very little, and that's what they try to do. And we've been doing the show for a long time to try to teach you and educate you, to help you and your family and your loved ones recover what they need to recover, and to recover a fair compensation. You know, and we've been talking in recent weeks about caps on damages. Well, today we're talking about a pretty tough subject. Wrongful death. We're talking about the death of a loved one, a death of a family member caused by somebody else's negligence, caused by what the law calls a tortfeasor, meaning an at-fault party, the person that's at fault. It can be an auto accident, it can be a hit and run, it can be a UIM, it can be a premises liability, but there are caps still on wrongful death damages. Now, we're not going to get to all the subject today. We're going to do a two-part series on wrongful death, and next week we're going to cover more on the caps and the damages, although we're going to touch on them a little bit this week. But this week we're going to set it up, explain to you how this statute works, explain to you what wrongful death recovery means, how it works basically, and how it fits into the larger scheme of things. But before we start on this very gruesome subject, wrongful death, so get ready. Before we start, I want to tell you, and Brad wants to tell you, that there are still caps on damages. And remember, the legislature passed the caps, lobbied for by the insurance industries, because they don't trust the jurors. And they don't trust the jury's verdict. And I want to remind you what we said in the last couple of weeks, that you are the jury. Your neighbor is the jury. So they don't really trust you to come in with a fair verdict. They want you to come in with a verdict, then you don't know about the cap, and then they want the court to reduce your verdict down to the cap amount, and they say everybody goes home, quote, just fine, end quote. And that's not true. Nobody goes home just fine. These statutes are draconian in nature, and they're designed to put a cap on what you can recover. And by the way, before we get started, I just want to ask you a rhetorical question real quick. What do you think the loss of a loved one should be worth? Maybe a loss of your parent, maybe a loss of a child. I mean, if you lost your 2-year-old at the hands of the negligence of somebody else, what is it worth? All right, we'll get to that today a little bit and more next week. But, you know, Brad, this wrongful death case, the wrongful death cause of action, you know, it never existed in common law, and maybe we need to start, you know, right there with common law and statutory law.
Probably very important, because when you have a right of action by statute only, then you're strictly limited to the right of action that the statute prescribes, period. So if you want to know what you have a right of action to with regard to the wrongful death of a person, it's what the statute provides. If anybody is out there and decides, well, I think I'll look it up or I'll Google it, you have to make sure you understand the difference between a wrongful death action and a survival action, because they are two different actions. They can both be brought at the same time. But what's important is to understand that the wrongful death, the common law, it was not recognized as a right of action. It was not recognized as something that anybody could collect under. And so you have to go to the statute, read the statute, be very clear on the statute, read the case law that interprets the statute, and that's going to tell you what your rights are under a wrongful death action, which basically covers more than the survival action, because the survival action only covers pecuniary loss, and that's all it's going to cover. It's pecuniary loss on behalf of the deceased. So when you start talking about a wrongful death action, that's going to open up certain avenues. It may or may not allow you to get up to the statutory caps. It's going to there's going to be a lot that's going to be examined as far as your relationship with the deceased and whether or not you even have a right to bring the case.
Right, and that's part of the statute. So in the beginning, we inherited our law from England. So our law is called the common law. That's where you hear the words common law. And so that's the case law. So we've explained this before, but it might be good to recover this point right now. The case law decided by the courts, the higher courts, you've heard like the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court of Colorado, the United States Supreme Court, the federal courts of appeals, they all decide cases. They don't make statutes. They decide cases. And when they decide a case, that becomes law. If they overturn a long tradition or long standing precedent, then they overturn it, and they do it by judicial decision, not the legislature. And there was this is not a political show, but to make a point, there was that the United States Supreme Court decision recently that called Citizens that said corporations were people, etc. And no matter what side of the issue you're on, that's an example of a court deciding and overturning a precedent of many years ago, and then creating new law. The court created new law. So every time a judge makes a decision, especially appellate court judges, they are creating new law. It's the common law, and that's one way laws are made. The other way laws are made is through the legislature, statutes. And that's what Brad was talking about. So there's two things that you can do when somebody is killed by a trauma, by an at-fault tortfeasor, that sort of thing, is, as Brad mentioned a minute ago, there's a survival action and a wrongful death action, but they're both created by the legislature. They're both statutes. They did not exist in the common law, so therefore you have to go to the statute to determine what your rights are going to be. And interestingly enough, Brad, people, once the statute's passed, everybody, I think, thinks, well, then the statute is covered. But many things in statutes are ambiguous, so then higher courts interpret what the statute means and create new law on the statute.
They do, and they'll expand it. And once they expand it, it's kind of interesting how the courts work. And someday maybe we'll do a show on that. But it's kind of interesting how the courts will work, because the courts will give their interpretation. And that interpretation, if it gets to the Court of Appeals and is rejected by the Supreme Court on the writ of cert, becomes the law. If the Supreme Court looks at it and makes a decision, that becomes the law. And that becomes the law as how the statute is to be interpreted. And the courts then just kind of sit back and wait to see if the legislature is going to go change the law again to say, no, court, that's not what we really meant. So, you have this interplay between the court and the legislature, of the legislature saying, here's what we've got and we're going to put it in writing. The court saying, here's how we're going to interpret it to all sorts of facts, because the legislature cannot think of every fact that's going to apply.
No.
When it's making a law. It just can't.
No. And there are many variations of that, but a good example is, the last 2 weeks we were talking about medical malpractice cases. A good example is the legislature passed a statute, as we told you, putting a cap on the amount of money that you can recover from a healthcare provider, a nurse, a doctor, or any healthcare provider. But the original statute left out a couple of important words, like physical impairment. And so what the courts did was they interpreted the statute and said, well, yeah, there's a cap of $1 million. There's a cap of $1 million, but that does not include physical impairment. So there's no cap on physical impairment. And then guess what happened next? They went running to the legislature, the insurance industry, and got it changed, a new statute to cover that loophole. So now physical impairment and disfigurement under that statute are now covered under the statute and covered under the cap. Do you see how that works?
So you've got to at all times be always cognizant of the fact that when you watch a statute come into place, then you've got to look at the case law that's interpreted it. Then you've got to look to see when, if ever, the statute's been amended, and see if those amendments might have been directed right towards the case law that was interpreted, thus making the case law no longer applicable.
Right.
And now you've got to look at the new case law.
Exactly. And that's what lawyers do. We describe that's part of our process right there. Not the whole thing. That's part of the process. Okay, back to the wrongful death, this gruesome subject of death. You've lost a loved one, okay? What is the loss of your 3-year-old child, 7-year-old child to a drunk driver? What's that worth? Okay, and we're going to cover it. We may not get to it next week. We're going to try to cover it to the end of the show. What's the loss of your spouse? Your spouse of 10 years, 5 years, 30 years. What's it worth, money-wise? And some people say that's just blood money. You just want money. Well, what about the tortfeasor? They did something wrong. What if they were high on heroin, cocaine, and drunk? They shouldn't pay anything? Their insurance company shouldn't pay anything? Just leave it alone? So that's why the statute was created, but there's also caps on wrongful death. Okay, back to this wrongful death and survival statute, Brad. You can do a survival action, but that's limited to the pecuniary loss that the family members had, like funeral expenses, like, they might be in the hospital for a month and then die. Yeah.
It can cover a lot as far as if a person is hit or injured and they're in the hospital or in a coma or something, and the medical bills get up to a huge amount, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. Now, this is especially important, Gary, on the example you gave. If your 5-year-old child is hit by somebody, let's say a driver, and the driver is negligent and at fault, and your 5-year-old child is placed in a coma and is there for 6 months, 7 months, that's going to be a $500,000 bill probably.
Or more, yeah, absolutely.
So what's going to happen is they're going to, the hospital and everybody's going to look to the parents. That's the child. The parents brought the child in or was brought in. The parents have financial responsibility. So now the parents are faced with this $500,000-$600,000 bill, or maybe $1 million bill from the hospital for all the care that's been given to the child on the child who's died, who's passed away. Well, that's where we start talking about a survival action. Right. To try and pay for some of those bills because the parents are going to be straddled with it.
Okay, but listen to this. Brad just gave a great example. So $500,000 to $1 million in medical bills. Though that exceeds the cap. Wow. That exceeds the cap. How does that work? Well, you don't get the money because the legislature and the insurance industry lobbied for a cap because they don't trust the jury verdict, because you are the jury. Your neighbor is the jury. Because you reach a fair verdict, render the verdict, write it down, deliberate. Everybody agreed. 6 people agreed. Give it to the court. Everybody leaves. Then the judge reduces your verdict down to the cap. And you never know about it. So that's how it works in the law. That's how it works in courts. Okay, so we talk about the survival statute. You get to recover up to the cap. You get to recover the pecuniary losses. But there's also a wrongful death statute. And you can bring both of them at the same time. That's beneficial. You can bring a survival action and a wrongful death action at the same time. Usually, a survival action, once the person has passed away dead, it has to be brought by the estate, but we're not going to get into that part right now. We're going to cover later who can bring these actions, which is a fascinating part of the statute in the scheme of law anyway. So, but Brad, the statute of let's talk briefly about the statute of limitations. The statute of limitations is created by statute. It's different than most statute of limitations, and you have to comply and meet the statute of limitations.
Right. And that's, statute of limitations is 2 years. You've got 2 years from the date of death. Now, there used to be a lot of different ways that people were talking about it and when it starts to run or anything else. Statute's going to run 2 years from the date of death. Now, there may be some things that extend the statute if there's fraud by the person who's committed the wrongful act resulting in death, or if there are other circumstances such as a person who's under what we call a disability at law, and that can be a child, perhaps may have more time. That can be a person who may, let's say it's a husband and wife in the car and there's an accident and the husband's killed and the wife is put in once again is in a state that the wife cannot really tend to affairs for a couple of years. Well, that's probably going to be extended at that point.
Right. And this was all changed in the late 80s. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years of laws. I think it was 1987 that this was changed. And so think about this. The original statute of limitations said that you had to bring it within 2 years after the time that you reasonably or should have discovered the negligence. And as Brad just said, what if there's a car accident? Nobody can do anything. They're on a coma. They're incapacitated. They're incompetent mentally, physically. And so the 2 years goes by and they say they haven't even died yet. So the statute of limitations in the old days would have expired before the person even died. Really? And so that was changed by statute in 1987 that says the statute of limitations is 2 years from the date of death, okay? 2 years from the date of death, so that eliminated that loophole. You see how those loopholes happen in the law?
Gary, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have to make sure that everybody understands that 2 years can be cut short if a governmental entity is involved.
Absolutely.
So you got to understand, if you're sitting there going, well, somebody died and I got 2 years to take action. No, you may not.
Well, Brad, that's a great point. We got a break coming up, but I want you to hit that one out of the park when we come back. You're listening to the Bell and Pollock Legal Show. I'm Gary Bell, along with my partner, Brad Pollock. Our law firm is Bell and Pollock. We're in Greenwood Village, conveniently located, I-25 and Orchard. Easy access. You can come visit us anytime. We'll buy you a cup of coffee. We'll give you a cup of coffee. Our telephone number, 303-795-5900, 795-5900. That's our telephone number. Our website is championsofthepeople.com. You couldn't forget that if you tried. Championsofthepeople.com. We are Colorado's premier injury law firm, and we are your champions of the people.
Ready for an extraordinary lunch? As fast or as slow as you want it? With all fresh ingredients? Caitlin's Restaurant has it all. Express lunches that won't keep you waiting. Or, if you prefer, lunch served in that old-fashioned homemade style. All made fresh, on the spot. Whether it's a fresh-made sandwich with homemade chips, quesadilla loaded with cheddar or jack cheeses, or scratch-made soups, you'll find everything you love at Caitlin's. Caitlin's is located on Mississippi just east of Colorado Boulevard next to Bookies. How about green chili chicken stew? Think about a variety of fresh-made sandwiches or 11 different kinds of burgers made to order with 1/2 pound of the finest USDA choice lean ground beef. You might favor a homemade New Mexican recipe with carne adobada burritos, chicken enchiladas, carnitas burritos, served with hash browns, special recipe beans, cheeses with guacamole, and your choice of homemade red or green chili sauces. For those who prefer the lighter side, there are fresh made salads and lighter fares, sure to delight. Try Caitlin's for lunch or breakfast on Mississippi, just east of Colorado Boulevard next to Bookies. Call 303-798-6600. You'll love it every bite of the way.
When a driver chooses to violate a safety rule, everyone on the road is in danger. That means you, me, everyone. Driving and dangerous choices. Think about it. The only allowable choice is the safest choice. Otherwise, you and your family are put at risk, in harm's way. This is really what car crashes are all about. One driver makes a choice that violates a safety rule. Everyone else is needlessly put in danger. In danger of injury, medical bills, surgery, lost jobs, quality of life changes, and future expenses. All it takes is one driver and one dangerous choice. I'm Gary Bell of the law firm of Bell and Pollock. We've been representing injured victims for over 25 years. We can help you put your life back together again. We'll fight the insurance company who defends those who injure you and your family, those who make dangerous choices. At Bell and Pollock, we are experienced injury attorneys who care about you and your family. Reach us at bellpollock.com or championsofthepeople.com or call us at 303-795-5900. That's 795-5900. One call, that's all. Good morning. Welcome back to the Bell and Pollock Legal Show. Gary Bell, Brad Pollock. Our law firm is Bell and Pollock. We are injury attorneys. We've been in business for over 25 years representing injured victims. We can help you put your life back together again. We can help you figure out how you get your bills paid. We can help you recover for your injuries. And it's a relief when you have a professional working for you. Put our experience and our expertise to work for you. We've helped a lot of families, a lot of people. Our telephone number, 303-795-5900, 795-5900. Our website, championsofthepeople.com. All right, right before the break, we were talking about statute of limitations, and we're gonna pick on that, but I need to correct something I said earlier. I was talking about a cap on damages, and I said there's survival action. You can have the pecuniary losses like medical bills, that sort of thing. There's no cap on financial losses or no cap on economic losses under the normal wrongful death statute. So I didn't mean to imply or state that there was a cap, and I might have said that where it did imply that, and I didn't mean it that way. So there, financial losses, there's no cap. And I'll give you a good example, okay? A good example is, let's say you've got a very, very high wage earner, all right? Like maybe a CEO of a corporation, maybe a professional football coach, maybe a hockey coach, maybe a hockey player, and they're earning a lot of money, maybe $6 million, $10 million a year, and they're killed. Okay, so their lost wages over their lifetime, those financial wages are not capped.
No, they're not capped. An example, if you take any one of our star football players or athletes here in Colorado that are due to make millions and millions, $5, $10, $15 million a year, and they're killed, you're going to, if the person has the money that's killed them, you're going to have a chance to collect that $5, $10, $15 million. You're not going to have the chance to collect anything past the statutory cap for the non-economic, for the pain and suffering, for the grief. And as a matter of fact, you're going to be put through your paces trying to prove how much you should get for that.
Exactly right. Now, there is a cap on non-economic damages. And so when we say cap, that's what we're talking about. But the non-economic damages are loss of a loved one. So what's the loss of a loved one to you worth? And we're still not to that question, that answer, but what are they worth? So you're getting a flavor of how attorneys analyze and detail cases, figure out cases. You can call us at any time, 303-795-5900, 795-5900. Our website is championsofthepeople.com. All right, let's talk about a fascinating subject, Brad, on these wrongful death cases. I mean, and it applies to any case, but we're talking about wrongful death, a gruesome subject, loss of a loved one at the hands of somebody else through their fault, through their negligence, sometimes their intentional, willful behavior like drunk drivers. So you're talking about the loss of a loved one, but we got an area law called conflicts of laws, and there's no way Brad and I can cover all the nuances of conflicts of laws, but let's say you've got a citizen from Colorado, and there's a person in Colorado visiting from New Jersey, and they cause an accident in Colorado. So what laws apply? Colorado or New Jersey laws? See, I think there's a good question. Or some other law.
And so you're going to always be having to deal with what laws should apply. And a good lawyer to begin with is going to look at where all the different laws or where the events occurred and what laws might apply. So a good lawyer can determine what might be best for their client as far as what the recovery should be. So, we can always talk about what law generally is going to apply. You start out with probably, if the accident happened here in Colorado by a Colorado resident being the at-fault party, and it caused the death of, let's say, somebody vacationing from Indiana, you got a chance, you got a probability that Colorado law is going to apply. But that's not necessarily the last word. What I can say to anybody out there and so firmly believe is that if you've had the wrongful death of someone, a loved one, a relative, you need to go contact a lawyer immediately.
Absolutely.
You need to get a lawyer who has some knowledge and information about these topics so they can deal with it and they can examine all the different nuances that apply.
Well, and this is called choice of laws or conflict of laws. It's an entire law course in law school. It's very complicated. It's very detailed. It's evolved over the years. There used to be different rules. Now there's different rules now. There used to be other rules then, years ago, long time ago. And most of these are created by the common law. What did I tell you the common law was? That was the court decisions, judge decisions, judge-made decisions by courts of appeals, district courts, Colorado Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court. So sometimes the choice of laws is a very important critical factor. So you need attorneys who understand this principle because in the example, what law applies? New Jersey or Colorado? I mean, the person who caused the accident is from New Jersey. The accident happened in Colorado. The injured person or the person who was killed lived in Colorado, was a resident and domiciliary of the state of Colorado. So does the New Jersey law apply? Or does Colorado law apply? And Brad, there's a test, and so let's cover this test real quick.
The test for?
Choice of laws, conflict of laws. What's the basic rule of thumb?
It's going to be minimum contacts to find out what the minimum contacts are within the state or within the locality where the injury occurred versus where the people might have been living.
Right, and I think the most recent cases talk about the most significant relationship with the contacts. So the most significant relationship, what does that mean?
Right, they're going to look at the contacts. First of all, they're going to find if there's minimum contacts to invoke other states' laws and what the contacts are. And then they're going to look and see among those contacts which one has the greatest applicability to what is most important. Now, a lot of times just to that state's policy, which is very interesting because sometimes you're going, well, why would I care about what that state's policy is? So, but they're going to look at those contacts and they're going to look about what the significant contacts are at that point. So once again, taking my example, you've got somebody a person vacationing or out here on a business trip in Indiana who's killed in Colorado by a negligent driver. Well, now you've got, think about the context. You've got our desirability to enforce our laws here in Colorado concerning the caps and the minimums.
Right.
But you've got, let's say the person who was killed left a family behind and that family is living in Indiana, and let's say Indiana has no caps. If they have no caps, they may be saying, well, wait a minute. And if they don't have the limitations Colorado has, they may be saying, wait, the spouse and all the children want to bring an action to collect for all the non-economic damages that were experienced. And they say we have no caps, so they may be looking at being able to collect $500,000 or $1 million.
Right, with no caps. And that's what good lawyers do. They analyze the case. You're listening to exactly how analysis goes, exactly how you detail and figure out a case. So there might be an argument before the court, in Brad's example, that Colorado law would apply, Judge, Your Honor, and because Colorado has the most significant relationship, et cetera. And then the other side might be arguing that Indiana law would apply, under Brad's example. Indiana law would apply because it has the most significant relationship, because in his example, the person who died was from Indiana. Their family's still back in Indiana. Their family lives there. So which laws apply? I mean, is it Indiana or Colorado? And I'm telling you what, that's just a small, well, not small, but smaller point compared to some of the others, but it's an argument. So if the judge decides one way or the other, sometimes that's a subject of an appeal.
Well, the important part to begin with, that's why you need to see a lawyer immediately. Come see us. We'll talk to you about it. Because here's the thing. Jim is married and living in Indiana with his wife and 3 children. And is a very active father, involved with his children, involved with his family, and is very important. He comes out here to see his grandmother or his mother, who's living in Colorado, and he's killed in Colorado as a result of an unfortunate accident. And the mother, Jim's mother, who he's visiting and lives in Colorado, comes to see a Colorado lawyer about the death of her son. Meanwhile, you've got his wife and children going to see a lawyer in Indiana about the death of their husband and father. If those 2 lawyers don't get together and talk and figure out what is in the best interest, you have 2 jurisdictions that may have some type of right to determine what should be recovered by heirs.
And you put that argument in front of the district court judge. They make the decision. Sometimes it's appealed. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're wrong. And that's the way the law goes. And that's how an appeal is created. Now, Brad was just touching on a very important subject. Who, and we're running out of time today, but we're going to do a sequel and maybe a part 2 and maybe a part 3 on this. It's very important. But who has the right to bring an action, a lawsuit, for the wrongful death of somebody? So we're not going to have time to cover it today. We'll get to that next week. And also, I'm going to leave you with the question. I'm sorry we couldn't give you an answer today, but we'll get to it next week. I'm going to leave you with the question, what is the loss of your loved one worth? What is the loss of your 3-year-old child, your teenager? What's it worth? Also, what's the loss of your spouse worth? And don't forget, Brad warned you earlier that the 2-year statute of limitations may be changed by the Governmental Immunity Act and maybe 6 months instead of 2 years. You're going to stay tuned. You're listening to the Bell and Pollock Legal Show, the only show of its kind. We are injury attorneys in Greenwood Village. Our telephone number is 303-795-5900. Our website is championsofthepeople.com. We are Colorado's premier injury law firm, and we are your champions of the people.